Welcome to the Mind Tap Podcast. I'm your host, Garret Fauth, and today I will be interviewing Major League Baseball pitcher for the Colorado Rockies, Lucas Gilbreath. Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at mindtap_pod. And enjoy the show. Hey, joining me is former University of Minnesota pitcher and now 2 years in the MLB with the Colorado Rockies, relief pitcher Lucas Gilbreath. Thanks for being on. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. So I'm just going to get pitcher. How important is a pitcher's routine, and can you break down your pitching routine?
Yeah, so I think a routine is one of the biggest pieces as a pitcher that gets you locked in consistently and helps you focus kind of pitch to pitch, because in all reality, you're kind of the center of the tension in a sense, and you have to do something to make every single play happen. So for me, being locked in is a huge piece of how I get ready and how I prepare for each outing. So my routine specifically, a lot of it is tied to the warm-up, the activation, that kind of stuff, which is not only physical but also mental. So for me, it's getting dialed in on, okay, how am I feeling? What do I need to address? What do I not need to address? And then starting to dial into what is the situation of the game? How am I getting mentally prepared? And what kind of situation am I potentially going to be going into? Because as a reliever especially, you kind of have to be ready for anything. So a lot of times it's me getting prepared to go into that bases loaded jam or go in to face that tough hitter late in the game. So the routine kind of differs day to day, even, to be honest with you, but most of it is revolved around getting mentally prepared to go into whatever situation it may be.
I'm going to take you back a little. In 2014, you got drafted by the Rockies out of high school in the 36th round. You ended up not signing, but going to play college baseball for University of Minnesota. What was the reasoning for that decision?
Yeah, my parents had always made it a priority for me, and I agreed with education was a huge piece. You never know how long baseball is going to last, so I wanted to get a start on my education, and the University of Minnesota was a really good fit for me to do that. So for me, it was just getting to continue to work on my baseball skills, but also starting to further my education.
So did you think or ever question that your draft stock could be affected if you performed poorly or if you did good? And did that add to pressure to perform in college?
Yeah, there's definitely some pressure, and honestly, there were points when it became more real, when you start getting into sophomore, junior year, and you start hearing from teams and you start seeing scouts at your game. There's definitely something to be said for that pressure you just put on yourself to be, I have to perform that much better. I have to do this. I have to do that. And in all reality, there's not that much, and there shouldn't be that much more pressure, but in your head, you get to the point where you think that you have to do something special when all you got to do is be yourself and do the best you can.
And it's kind of crazy. You got picked up by the Colorado Rockies again. Did you know that could be a chance again?
To be honest with you, no. I'd always hoped for it, but as you know, with the baseball draft, you really have no control. So for me, it was kind of just trying to find that right fit, and unfortunately it worked out again, and being able to play for that hometown team, it was more of just a luck thing than anything.
Yeah. So you grinded it out in the minors for a couple of years. How did you stay focused on the goal of pitching in the MLB?
Yeah, so the minor leagues, it's gotten a lot better in the past few years, but it was tough, and it puts a lot of stress on your performance. It puts a lot of stress on your life. You're living in not so ideal circumstances. So to me, I kept locked in and stayed locked in on my daily process, which was getting better at the things I thought I needed to get better at that were going to get me to the big leagues. So I focused on that rather than the bad circumstances.
Yeah, so you just took it one day at a time, trying to focus on the now.
Yeah, because you have to stay present, because obviously the minor leagues is not where you want to end up, and everybody has the goal of getting to the big leagues, but at the end of the day, you're not there. So you have to be present where you are, and you have to work with what you have, whether that be in single A or triple A or the big leagues.
In 2021, you get called up to the major leagues, and you make your debut for the Colorado Rockies by coming into the bottom of the ninth to close out a game against the Diamondbacks. Josh Rojas comes up to the plate, and on your first major league pitch, he hits a home run off of you. How did you recover from that to close out the game, and what was your thought process?
Yeah, so honestly, going into the game for your debut, my whole thing was just throw a strike. first pitch, right? Throw a strike, get ahead, get that first pitch out of the way, get ahead 0-1, all that stuff. And so, of course, boom, first pitch, loud crack, outfield going back, and then splash in the pool. I'm like, oh my gosh. So after that, for me, it was just like, okay, well, I got to get through this inning. In the big leagues, especially when you debut, all you're going for is like the lasting impression, right? So you don't want to be in a spot where like all they can think of is, oh, he gave up a homer and then he imploded. So I was just like, keep executing pitches, get through the inning, try and get a strikeout, all that stuff, and that's where I was at.
Do you think getting that first home run out of the way so early?
Yeah, I think it's there's definitely something to be said for like right off the bat we had worst case scenario. So from there it was like, well, it can't get much worse than that. So I can work through that, and I got it out of the way, like you said, and I can get better.
I interrupt this interview to bring this podcast sponsor, 3 Peaks Performance, mental performance mastery training for athletes, coaches, and individuals who are seeking to gain a competitive advantage by maximizing their mental game while optimizing their physical, technical, and tactical training. To find out more about 3 Peaks Performance, visit their website, 3peaks, P-E-A-K-S, performance.com. That website is 3peaksperformance.com. And follow their Instagram at 3peaks Performance. Thank you, 3 Peaks Performance, for sponsoring this podcast. Now let's get back to the interview. So things don't always go right for pitchers. Either you're down in the count or you gave up a home run. How do you refocus on the pitch in front of you without worrying about what's happening?
So for me, a lot of it is your breathing. So with the breathing, it's trying to slow down the heart rate and trying to get back on track of like, okay, the past is the past. What's my focus? So I take some deep breaths. I try and reset that way. And then I go into the plan of attack. So in a 2-0 count, it's like, okay, I'm fine. I'm going to execute a fastball low and away right here, and he's going to get out. And so you just kind of have to reset yourself with the breathing and then dive into the future and what you're trying to do.
Has that breathing always been a part of your game?
That's something I didn't really get into until college, and I was fortunate our pitching coach was very big on the breathing and the refocusing techniques, and that helped me a ton once we dove into that.
Speaking of refocusing and all that, do the Colorado Rockies offer anyone who truly helps with that aspect?
Yes, so we have 2 full-time sports psychologists or mental skills coaches that are pretty much solely responsible for like helping you with your preparation, your routine, your breathing, and all that stuff, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm. So, did you have any nerves of pitching to the big name guys in the league? And if so, how did you handle them?
Yeah, it's funny. Like you start thinking about guys that you grew up watching, like a guy like Albert Pujols, and it gets a little surreal sometimes. You're like, oh my gosh. And I think they call it imposter syndrome, where you start to think like, I don't know if I belong here. But I always just try and tell myself that hitting is very difficult. And that's kind of it's not really positive self-talk, but in a way for me, it's self-talk that says, I know that like I can do my part, and hitting's really hard regardless of if it's Albert Pujols or Mike Trout. Hitting's hard, and I can do this.
And then on the reverse side, what is the feeling like of striking out some of the big names like Manny Machado, and I think Mookie Betts is another guy you struck out?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because like you almost don't expect them to strike out, right? It's like they're so good. Even if I execute a really good pitch in my head, I'm like, well, maybe he's going to ground out or whatever. So it's kind of crazy. Like you see that swing and miss, and you get that instant kind of adrenaline and tinkly feeling like, oh my gosh, I did it.
How is the atmosphere of pitching at home at Coors Field versus pitching on the road at like Truist Park? And is there a different mental approach because play revolves around you as a pitcher, and so all eyes are on you? How are you able to tune out the fans?
Yeah, in a sense, like you have to get to the point where you're so focused on what you're doing that you can't really hear the fans. And you can obviously always hear them, but you want it to be where you're kind of just faintly hearing little things here and there. So you're just hearing noise. So I try to get dialed in on what I'm trying to do. I'm dialed in on the catcher, and I'm dialed in on my plan. So that noise just kind of becomes background noise.
So speaking of the catcher, how important is the pitcher-catcher chemistry and relationship?
That's one of the biggest things. And knowing what pitches to call, knowing what I like to throw in certain counts, that takes a lot of pressure off the pitcher to be able to have to call his own game and have to do kind of everything. To have a good catcher that can walk you through that, it's really a game changer.
And then how do you normally build that relationship with the catcher?
For me, it's mostly just like open communication. So after outings and spring training, even in the season, it's, hey, why'd you call this pitch? Or, hey, I saw this. I like to do this in these counts. And so it's really just keeping active communication and engaging with one another.
So this past season, you had to have season-ending Tommy John surgery. How was the mental process of coming back from injury like? Because some people get nervous and don't want to rush it. Others want to rush in because there's that lack of comfort of being on the sideline for so long. How did you deal with your process?
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic because if you really think about it, I've played baseball every summer, every spring, every fall since I was 4 years old or whatever. So it was a weird dynamic to not be playing, to be on the sideline. But for me, I don't get too anxious about the outcome. I'm somebody that believes that, like, to trust the process and everything happens for a reason. So I just do my part on the rehab and I trust the doctors and what they did. And so I'm just trying to build back and, like you said, not come back too fast, but I'm really confident in my rehab and how hard I worked and what they did.
Baseball season is a long one with so many games. You are a pitcher, so you aren't playing every single game, but you are staying active on the days you don't. How important is recovery, and what has worked for you specifically?
Yeah, with how long baseball season is, that's one of the biggest pieces to stay consistent, is getting consistent recovery and making sure you feel good for the most part. So for me, sleep is the biggest one. Sleep is the one thing that is a surefire way to make sure your recovery is good or bad, whether you get sleep or don't get sleep. But I'm also I've been getting bigger into the nutrition, what I eat, when I eat it, and then just like rolling out and making sure your muscles are happy. I always joke that like every day my activation and recovery routine is revolved around just making me feel good. And you got to learn to know or get to know your body, because that's something that learning how your body works is a huge piece of recovery.
So going along with the season, it's a long one. How do you stay focused on the task at hand and not divert your focus from either past games or future ones coming up?
Yeah, I think in order to stay focused, you just kind of have to take it day by day, as cliche as that sounds. You know you're going to play every day, and you have the same schedule almost every day, but you go into it knowing, like, okay, this is the situation I might go in, this is my warm-up routine, this is when I have to start doing it, this is what it looks like, this is how I execute. So that process thing is just a huge, huge piece to get dialed into.
So with all these situations in baseball, you come in and there's high pressure ones, bases loaded. How do you deal with those nerves?
So I try to use the nerves in a positive way. So it's like, I know I'm anxious, I know I have all this nervous energy. How can I harness that and kind of turn that into adrenaline and velocity and whatever else we want to call it, sharpening my focus? So I try to use that energy and kind of, instead of like trying to hide it and get rid of it, I just try and bottle it up and kind of push it into my pitch execution, my focus, whatever I can. And it's easier said than done, but it's kind of something you learn to do over time.
Yeah, so do you have any advice for baseball players out there trying to make it to the big leagues?
I think the biggest key in baseball is knowing yourself, knowing what you're good at, what you're bad at, how you operate and how you move, and how everything about you, because that's what's going to help you to know what to work on, how to work on it, when to work on it, how to focus, how to reset yourself, how to recover. It's all revolved around you. So having that feel and that awareness for who you are and what you do is a huge, huge piece.
And then in terms of the average person, any advice for them mentally in there?
I think adversity is such a huge part of life, and baseball is a great teacher for how to handle adversity and failure. But I think the biggest thing for everyone, people that play sports or don't play sports, is learning to use adversity to make yourself better and to make yourself into the person that you want to be, because everybody's going to hit adversity at some point, and you can either let it affect you and ruin your life, or you can let it build you into who you're going to become.
And that is it with this interview with Lucas Gilbreath. Thank you for being on the show, and I'll see y'all later.
Thank you, man. That was awesome.
And that's it for this episode's interview with Lucas Gilbreath. Make sure you follow the podcast on Instagram at mindtap_pod. That is mindtap_pod to stay up to date with what's happening next. I'll see y'all next time. Peace out.